All right, let's talk about mold. And we're going to dive into a pretty weird idea. What if the way you're heating your home is actually making the problem worse? Does this sound familiar? You're doing everything you think is right. You're paying the bills, you're cranking up the heat, but you're still finding those dreaded black spots in the corners or behind the sofa. It's super frustrating, right? And you're probably sitting there thinking, what on earth am I doing wrong?
I mean, we've all heard the old advice, haven't we? It seems so logical. Heat dries things out. So if you've got a damp problem, the answer must be more heat. Simple. But as we're about to find out, that piece of common wisdom isn't just oversimplified, it can actually backfire.
So here's the real kicker. The big secret isn't about how much heat you're using. It's all about how you use it. We're talking about the pattern, the daily rhythm of your heating. It's the cycle of warming up and cooling down that's the real game changer. It can either stop mold in its tracks or, well, roll out the welcome mat for it.
Okay, to really get why this happens, we need to dig into a little bit of science. Don't worry, it's simple. The real villain in this story isn't just damp. It's a very specific process, the condensation cycle. So let's break down exactly what that is. Okay, here's the one thing you absolutely need to know. Warm air can hold way more moisture than cold air. So when all that warm, humid air bumps up against a cold surface, think about a chilly window or a poorly insulated wall, it cools down fast. And when it cools, it can't hold all that moisture anymore, so it has to drop it. That's condensation. You've seen this a million times. It's the water on the outside of a cold drink can on a hot day.
And here's how that becomes a cycle in your home. So step 1, you turn the heating on. The air gets warm and starts acting like a giant sponge soaking up moisture from, cooking, showering, even just breathing. Then, step 2, you turn the heating off. The air cools down, and that big wet sponge effectively gets squeezed out, dumping all its water onto the coldest surfaces around. You do that every single day, and suddenly you've got a constant damp problem. And this chart shows you exactly what I'm talking about. See that top line with the big spikes and deep valleys? That's that unstable heating we've been discussing. That's what creates those condensation cycles over and over. Now look at the bottom line. It's a much gentler, more consistent curve. That's stable heating. It keeps your walls and windows from ever getting cold enough for that sponge to get squeezed. Okay, so now that we've got the science down, let's bring this back to the real world. Let's talk about some super common heating habits, things you might be doing right now without even realizing that are basically creating that perfect, unstable pattern for mold to thrive in. All right, first up is probably the most common one of all, what I call blast heating. You know the drill. You blast the heat for an hour in the morning while you're getting ready for work. Then it goes off all day while you're out. Then you get home and blast it again in the evening. What you're actually doing is creating 2 perfect condensation cycles every single day. And the moisture builds up on your walls way faster than it can ever dry out. But wait, it gets even more interesting. That warm, moist air doesn't just hang out in the room where you created it. Nope, it's always looking for somewhere colder and drier to go. So that steamy air from your nice, warm living room, it's on the move, migrating into those colder hallways and unheated bedrooms. Well, it has to end up somewhere, right? That moisture-packed air travels from the warm parts of your home and seeks out the coldest surfaces it can find in those unheated rooms, and that's where it dumps all its water. This is exactly why you might find a patch of mold in a spare bedroom you never even use, while the rest of the house feels perfectly fine. Okay, let's rapid fire a few other common culprits. First, letting the temperature plummet overnight. That's a big one. It creates a perfect storm in your bedroom, especially since you're in there breathing out moist air all night long. Then there's the cold spare room trick. Leaving a room totally unheated basically turns it into a giant magnet for all the moisture in your house. And finally, reactive heating. Only flicking the heat on when you suddenly feel chilly. If you do that, your walls never get a chance to properly warm up, which means they're always cold and just waiting for condensation. All right, that's enough about the problems. Let's talk about the solution. And here's the good news. Fixing this doesn't mean you have to use a ton more energy or rack up a huge bill. It's just about being a little smarter with your heating. And the goal, the one word to remember, is stability. Now, it's also worth pointing out that you gotta know your home. An older building with solid brick walls is gonna lose heat way faster than a new, super insulated house. And that means those older homes are much more sensitive to these big temperature swings, making a stable heating strategy even more crucial. So, what does a healthier heating pattern actually look like in practice? Well, instead of those short, intense blasts of high heat, you want to aim for a lower but much more consistent background temperature. Try to avoid those really big temperature drops overnight, and do what you can to even out the temperature differences between rooms. The goal here is simple. You just want to give your walls enough time to properly warm up and, most importantly, stay warm. So, we're coming to the big takeaway here. If you only remember one single thing from our little chat today, I want it to be this. It's the new rule that's going to replace that old, broken myth about just turning up the heat. Here it is. Forget about just cranking up the heat. Instead, think about keeping it stable. A consistent, steady temperature, even if it feels a little lower, is so much better at stopping condensation than those short, powerful blasts of heat. In the fight against mold, stability beats strength every single time. And so I'll leave you with this question. After everything we've talked about, what's one small change you could make to your own heating habits to create a more stable home? Maybe it's not turning the thermostat all the way off overnight, but just turning it down a few degrees. Just think about it. One tiny adjustment could make a massive difference.